thank you all for being here today. I am not naive to the fact that this will not hang on your living room walls or on your refrigerator or anything like that. So I do recycle, so if you would just leave them here and I'll pick them up. So, okay. In 1847, Ralph Waldo Emerson proclaimed in Essays First Series, "A friend is a person with whom I may be sincere, and that this relation requires the mean betwixt likeness and unlikeness that piques each with the presence of power and consent in the party. For historians, this type of intimate relationship between friends offers a rare and quite beneficial insight into the everyday experiences of ordinary people." Historian Sharon Ellie argues that by studying, quote, "the maze of friendship," the historian, methodologically speaking, is provided with, quote, "insightful accounts into people's private social worlds." The examination of commonalities between friends works to unearth the commonalities of entire communities, of neighborhoods and towns. However, this treasure trove has gone untapped in the field of historical studies. Thus, this study aims to explore the lives of two ordinary small-town country girls from Tipton, Oklahoma. The two walked into womanhood together during a time in American history that was both promising and worrisome during and after the Second World War. The study's purpose is to offer a new vision of how identity, in this instance female identity, is created, shaped, and often established by researching an intimate, non-kin bond. My argument is situated around three subjects of familiarity between Eunice Sutton Spurlock and June Martin Wells that aided in the creation, longevity, and continuity of their 78-year-old friendship. Before I proceed into my argument, I want to touch a minute on the methodology of my research, as the dominant portion of my work is based upon the interviews that were conducted by myself with my two subjects, the pair of 80-plus-year-old female friends, Eunice and June. A total of 4 interviews were recorded within a 5-day period, each ranging from 40 to 95 minutes. Each interview was conducted at the residence of Eunice Spurlock in Temple, Texas, in February of this year. One of the first questions I am often asked is, how did I find my subjects? To which I answer, Eunice is my lovely grandmother, my mother's mother. June is her childhood friend. Then naturally, I am asked how I conducted my research, oral testimony. When recording history, many techniques are used to gather the most reliable information to create a common basis for the events that have transpired over time. So that's what we historians do. That's our main goal. The question becomes, which method of research is best to record and analyze friendship as a viable historical source? By examining friendship through the process of recording, documenting, and analyzing oral interviews, the quote, "shards and remnants of these two women's lives are told through their own spoken testimony." Memory, however, can be problematic. Historians such as Michael Frisch proclaim that oral history tends to, quote, "reject subsequent research and evaluations, and are only flimsy representations of history that pawns the image of objectivity." Yet others, like Elaine Swain, argue oral history continues to be an important research methodology, and as such, should be treated in the university's special archives and collections as a resourceful tool for uncovering historical sources. One may have their own opinion as to if I'm able to successfully capture a vision of rural Oklahoma during the mid-20th century, but by using oral testimony as a source, the physical evidence of true emotion, not assumed or imagined as traditional history sometimes allows, was witnessed and recorded in this instance, making the research process that much more intriguing. I met June at church. I was 8 or 10, I didn't remember. It was somewhere in there. We met at church and have been the best of friends ever since, said Eunice. June agrees that the two met at the Church of Christ in Tipton. Her parents, John and Aleda, had been members of the congregation for years, and so had Eunice's aunt and uncle, Jim and Viola Sutton. When Eunice moved in 1937 from Pocahontas, Arkansas, to be closer to her mother's brother Jim and her sister Janelle, Her and her mother Bertha became members at the congregation where their relatives attended. The Church of Christ is a, quote, conservative, non-denominational church family seeking to praise, worship, and serve God with passion and devotion of first-century Christians. The Church of Christ was a space in which Eunice and June were able to plant the seed of friendship. This particular congregation meets 3 times a week, once in the middle of the week on Wednesday evening, and twice on the Lord's Day, Sunday morning and Sunday evening. June reported that the church was, quote, where our friendship developed, and then as we grew older and older, it just grew and grew. We became closer friends. Not only did the small Church of Christ congregation offer a physical space for the 2 young girls to get acquainted, it offered them a relative space of, quote-unquote, a likeness, meaning both girls had a place where they could exist with others whose morals and beliefs were socially and religiously aligned with their own. Elizabeth Roberts argues in her study of early 20th century women that when it comes to the relationships women held outside the family, it was dependent upon, quote, some degree of Christian activity, and that social activities enjoyed in childhood were often connected with the church. Eunice described her activities on the weekend with June and how special Sunday afternoons were to her. They would go home with one another after church on Sunday mornings, spend the entire day together, meet again with the congregation for worship that evening, and depart company after services. This was a weekly ritual of togetherness that, over time, became more and more meaningful to the two. June also remembered her days with Eunice after leaving Sunday worship. She explained that in her teenage years, after church, they would drive, quote, up and down Broadway, south and north, out to the orphans' home, then Main and east and back again, and they would stop and take pictures along the way in front of a church and school and giggle and giggle. Sunday was not only their day for worship and religious closeness, but it was also their day of friendly association with one another. Sociologist Roger Wonthrow argues, quote, as in other studies of friendship, the religiously involved are driven by the convenience and comfort of associating with their own kind, and that religious involvement encourages a kind of solidarity that is relatively more homogeneous than heterogeneous. In other words, religious affiliation brings those who are alike together in a familiar space of mutual morals and belief systems. In friendships, religion is a tool that both supports and fortifies a relationship. The small Church of Christ congregation was not the only fixture of support that helped cement this friendship. Just as the church offered them familiar conditions with one another where the two could share and flourish in their beliefs, the rural town of Tipton offered them a common place of togetherness in their childhood. During the Great Depression of the 1930s, as history has told us, Americans were in a desperate economic state. By 1933, unemployment in the United States had hit an astounding 25%, and the nation's gross national product had dwindled down to nearly half of what it was before the 1929 stock market crash. Being born in 1928, the pair was born into a time of extreme hardship, which only deepened to their low economic state. Eunice recalled that, quote, during the Depression years, everybody was affected by it, and of course, the less affluent you were affected worse. Eunice also remembered her home economics teacher who helped her make a nice suit. Quote, in home economics in high school, we had a very wonderful teacher that helped me especially because she knew I didn't have anything. I can remember one of the first garments she helped me sew was a blue wool two-piece suit. Yes. She later exclaimed that the teacher knew her mother and knew, quote, she didn't have any way of clothing me. The residents of Tipton took care of one another. As June explained, the community makes a child, help raise a child. Our parents raised us, but the friends looked out after us too. The small town and the people who inhabited it were, in essence, a network of neighbors who relied on one another and created their lives around this notion of community and togetherness. As mentioned, Tipton was an agricultural town. June's parents were farmers. Her father owned several farms, one in the Lane community, which was about 8 miles south of Tipton, and one a little less than 2 miles outside of Tipton. Her father and older brothers, Terry and Dee, worked the fields with a small group of hired help. Agricultural towns were hit hard during the Great Depression. as historian Giovanni Federico argues that agriculture was highly vulnerable to cyclical downturn in the economy. Farming communities pulled together and supported one another. So was the case in Tipton. June attested. The whole community, the little town, shared with each other. Neighbors shared, like Mother would raise a garden and she would share with our neighbors, and they would share with her if we didn't have something. Eunice recalled how she and her mother would go to her Aunt Viola's to help can vegetables and tend to the garden. Bertha and Eunice would usually leave with several cans of food that would last them a few days, which was a great comfort to the small family because Eunice's mother, quote, had asthma so bad she couldn't work, but she could can. The shared experience of growing up in a small community during the crisis years of the Great Depression played a discernible role in the formation of this friendship. The close-knit mentality of taking care of one another presented the friendship between June and Eunice an extra additive, a boost, if you will, because it solidified an emotional bond. Quote, no matter what, they would be there for one another. This was especially significant for Eunice. The emotional security June offered her was special because she thought herself unworthy of such a friend whose family was, quote-unquote, financially secured by owning a house and land. She explained, the social class, it didn't make her any bit of difference. Her mother liked me and her father liked me. They were as good to us as relatives would be. So that's the kind of friendship that I had with her. It didn't make any difference to her because I was the little part orphan girl that lived in the other part of town that wasn't the pretty houses. It didn't make her the bit of difference. This idea of a sustained friendship, no matter the circumstance, has been a documented aspect of friend formation for many years and has been rigorously studied. Sociologist Karen Walker, for example, asked 52 respondents from across the country what was their definition of a friend. An overwhelming amount of those in the study responded, quote, someone who's always there for you, to talk to if you need someone to talk to. This notion of reliability and mutual dependence was just as important to June's relational feelings towards Eunice, as she described. Quote, I was the youngest in the family and had older brothers, and didn't have a close sibling. I guess Eunice filled that gap. We were kind of like sisters. It didn't matter where we were, whether at my house or her house, if we walked or if we were in the car. It was just the companionship and love we had for one another. Eunice offered June a type of security that was familial-like. Each one offered the other a sentimental aspect of kinship, one that was emotionally charged because it filled a void they were feeling in their own family. The final aspect that solidified this friendship was one that easily weaves into the previous discussion of shared religious beliefs and commonalities through the community. As the girls came of age, growing into their teenage years and then onto their married lives, they seemed to relate to one another through their attraction and interaction with males. June explained, we were a community of young people that enjoyed each other and had fun together. As a group, we would have dates, but it was nothing serious. The young people of this small community had grown up together, known each other, struggled together, shared times of hardship with one another, and enjoyed each other's company. Eunice recalled, quote, one week we might be liking one guy, and then if we had a date, then something might come along, and the next week we might be going with someone else. We changed, June explained. If we had dates, we might double or triple date. Eunice might go with Beater Boyd one night, and I would go with him the next, and we might double date each time. We were all just good friends. As Eunice and June grew older, their interest in the opposite sex played a significant role in their bonding because they were able to involve themselves in mutual activities that would appeal to men. Historian Linda Rosenwig argues, quote, the interaction of sisters frequently consisted mainly of activities related to planning heterosexual encounters, arranging dates for one another, discussing hairstyles, cosmetics, clothing, and then sharing the details of ensuing experiences. Teenage girls often solidified their bonds with their friends when discussing boys and interacting with female rituals. Once the activity had taken place, going on a date, out to eat, the movie, etc., the girls would bond again in retelling their experience. This cyclical reenactment of friendly activity between Eunice and June strengthened the connection and again further solidified the relationship. After graduation, Eunice and her mother moved to Phoenix in the hopes of relieving Bertha's asthma in the dry air of Arizona in 1946. June, a great year younger than her dear friend, recalled, quote, "I thought I was ruined. After 80 years when the two get together, it is like they have returned to those back roads of rural Oklahoma. They giggle and reminisce on the good times they have shared with one another." In conclusion, it is overwhelmingly clear that the association between the two women began in their childhood at church. Through their common interest as inherited to them, their friendship blossomed. The Church of Christ still plays a significant role in their lives as they are both active members in their respective congregations and their place of residence, typical in Plainview, Texas. The community is still a fixture at which the two find commonality and purpose. Additionally, their families, their husbands and sons, daughters, granddaughters, daughters-in-laws, grandsons and sons-in-laws, have been points of interest in which the two bond and strengthen their relationship. It is a natural cycle of familiarity, of trust, and mutual understanding that allows this relationship to continue. Through studying this friendship of almost 80 years, I was granted a rare insight into the lives of not only these two women, but of their families and of their friends' families, and to a lesser extent, of the community of Tipton at large. In exploring their relationships people hold to be, quote-unquote, sincere, the historian gets an extraordinary look at the lives of those who create and weave together the fabric of American tradition. It is in these woven threads that history is created. It is in these woven threads there lies a vision of elsewhere.